Like, they're telling dad jokes over here. That's great. These these punchline moments, you're heading in one direction, and then something happens for better or worse, and you're heading in a new direction. In other words, you thought something was one way, but really it was another. And so what we ended on last week was uh, that relationship in life is really the goal. And so we talked about the difference in how much of our culture and much of our life, even in our church experience and our following Jesus and all of those things, we oftentimes kind of get these ideas in our minds of what things are supposed to look like. And so we kind of follow that journey ahead, and we're like, I want to be a better dad. I want to be a better employee. I want to be a better whatever. And so we kind of spend every day of our lives increasing our education and understanding people better so that we can relate to one another better. And all of those things are well and good. But especially when it comes to our faith, we start trying to check boxes. And if I can be good enough, well, then I'll be a good Christian. By the way, there's no such thing as a good Christian. That would imply that there are certain classes of Christians. And so if you've ever found yourself saying, like, oh yeah, they're one of the really good Christians, it's like, well, what are you? Like, I'm not a good Christian at all. And so you have these like different levels of Christianity, and there's really no such thing. There's people who follow Jesus, and there are people who've chosen not to. And that's it. And so in our following, we kind of develop this class system, and what we're really saying about the people who are good Christians is they do all the things better than I do all the things. Or they don't do all the things they're not supposed to do, and I do more of the things that you're not supposed to do. So they're a good Christian, but I still do fill in the blank. And so we attach all of these behaviors and all of these things and our church attendance and our giving and all of these things up against some arbitrary standard of being good enough to perfection, as if perfection is the goal. And so I laid out last week, and I had a lot of slides, by the way. It was probably really easy for the note takers in the room. All of that today is going to be not that, okay? I have like some verses up here that I'm going to show you, and everything else is going to be a little bit more of a conversation. And I hope that some of the things that are said in this conversation, and just me talking a little bit through some of the stuff, disorients you the same way that it does me. And somebody asked me after the last service, have you ever like spoken these messages before? And I said, last week, that is like the message that when I'm at a church for the first time, that is the one that I give. Because I think it is so foundational, and it is such a punchline, game-changing, direction-changing idea that it has to be shared with as many people as possible. What I'm going to share today is not something I've ever shared, but it is my journey, really. It is just letting kind of like all of us be in on the process that has been like my life and what the Lord I feel is teaching me and leading me and guiding me through and all of that. And so there may be things that you totally disagree with that I say. That's okay, because the idea is that we come in to this room and we explore our own belief system, our own faith, that we take steps toward Jesus maybe in a way that we haven't before, even if it's through something that I say that you kind of push back on. I hope that it gets us all to something that increases our faith and increases our belief in who Jesus really is. And so that's perfectly okay with me. And so if you're a note taker, you're going to be frustrated today. I don't have 3 points with like 3 sub-points under each one, all of that. And so just kind of sit back, listen, think, process. It's okay. So everybody good with that? Say good? All right, cool. So what we talked about last week was that relationship is the goal. Not perfection, but relationship. That's what we're trying to do. And so if you missed last week, feel free to go back online and watch it. I think it's a really important kind of foundational element. So we're just going to start as if everyone's on the same page. That relationship in life, it is the goal. In our families, in our relationship with the Lord, in our culture, in our world, everything drives to relationship. And why is that? I want to build on one of the points that I made last week, and it's that relationship is the language of love. So if we're going to communicate love to one another, it has to come through the door of relationship. Relationship is the language of love. And so when you think about John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son, all right? He gave us a relationship. He gave us a person. We think about his name will be called Emmanuel, God with us. When God our Father, our dad in heaven, when he looked down on us, when he was observing us, when he was following us, when he was pursuing us, he said, not just for God so loved, I don't just love them, but I so love them. I so love the world. And so John, when he's penning these words as he's communicating the heart of our dad toward us, he says, for God so loved, meaning I need to make a point here. I need to introduce something new that has never been introduced to people before. And so for all of time, we know that there was a creation. We know that God started it all, and we are here now. And there's a story of his people and his people rebelling, and then his people coming back to him, and then they rebel some more, and then they wander off in a far land, and then they get to the promised land, and they wish they weren't even there. And, all these things throughout the Old Testament. And so the story of humanity was trying to figure God out. How can we, in our humanity, in our brokenness, in our desire to understand God and his relationship to us, how can we make our way to him? And that was the story of God and humanity to this point. But he said, I so love my people that I want to show them another way. And because I so love them, the way that I'm going to communicate, in other words, the way that I'm going to reveal who I really am, is through a relationship. It was through the person of Jesus. I am going to send myself in the form of Jesus to be a relationship, to be with my people. And so the language of love is relationship. And so we said that he came to restore our relationship with him. And so when you think about what he came to restore, sometimes we might want to go back to like Adam and Eve, and we think about, okay, in the garden, everything was perfect. Everything was great. There was no sickness. There was no fill in the blank of all the bad things that we know are in our world today. And so there wasn't any of this stuff, but Adam and Eve, what did they do? They chose to take a bite of the fruit. And so they chose to eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so sometimes someone might ask, what is sin? Where did it come from? Well, it happened when they ate the fruit. God told them, don't eat off of that tree, and then they did, right? And so what I want us to think about for a minute is not necessarily a literal tree in the garden, not necessarily a literal piece of fruit, but let's just think of it in terms of what that tree in the story might represent. Let's think of it, what did that fruit represent? What was this moment? What was actually happening here? Because God created Adam and Eve, and in this garden, they had free reign of everything in the garden. Everything that they saw with them, they had free reign, and it says that every day they walked and talked with God. And so in the beginning, yes, creation, all the things, but we're here, and we are in perfect unity with God. Perfect relationship with him. And so in the middle of the garden were two trees, actually. One was the tree of life itself. And this tree of life was the very life that sustained them. It was God. It was the tree of life. It represented everything that they had from God for life. And the other tree was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so what was really lost that day? What was really broken? Do you think that he sent his son to die and restore the fact that we ate from a tree? Like, no, it's a tree. It's fruit. It's really not about the fruit. It's really not about the tree. Something else was going on here. And so what our enemy, the deceiver, did was show himself to Eve. And what he got her to question, and where he got in the middle of this and disrupted some things, was the relationship. How did he do this? He said, did God really say not to do this? And so he took the words of Jesus. There was enough truth in what he proposed to her, or took the words of God. There was enough truth proposed to her that she was led down a road of deception where trust was broken with her Father, with her Creator, with her friend, with the Lord who walked and talked with them in the garden. And when trust is broken, there is no safety. And so think about this in the course of a relationship. When trust is broken in a relationship with a friend, with a spouse, with a child, safety is removed from that relationship. And when safety is removed from that relationship, vulnerability is removed from that relationship. And when you show up in a relationship where you cannot be vulnerable any longer, you only show up as a version of yourself, but not the real thing. Therefore, real love no longer exists. We're not actually in a relationship with pure, unadulterated love because we've experienced a breach in trust. And because of that, we're no longer safe. And because of that, we can no longer show up as the real you and me. And so the relationship is founded on something that is actually not even pure love. And we can't show up in that way. So what was lost that day was our relationship with the Father. Our relationship with the one who said, I have everything that you need. And so where there was once a belief system for Adam and Eve that said all we need is in our relationship with our Father, they were able to receive a free exchange of pure, unadulterated love through the relationship. And so it is today that we continue to be on our journey to try to understand God and what is his interaction with humanity through the lens of relationships that are often broken and don't look like love at all. Isn't that mostly what we see in our world today? Broken relationship, broken homes, rejection in the midst of the relationships that we have, and then we try to reconcile that somehow with the love that we know is supposed to be from our Father. It's broken. And so where there was a world that was broken, what God did was send a relationship, sent Jesus to show us what real love is all about. And so Jesus said when he was here, if you have seen me, you have seen the Father. It was God's communication to us to say, this is what I'm like. And so there's a lot of just trouble kind of in church circles and especially American Christianity where we try to interpret Scripture and like, what does this mean? And like, there's Old Testament stuff and it's hard to understand and people are like getting wiped out and, you know, all kinds of stories. And it's like hard to reconcile all of that. But one really, really great trick, like the crack code for this, is that all Scripture is meant to now be interpreted through the life of Jesus. And so if it does not line up with the way that Jesus lived, because he said, I'm here to show you what the Father is like. I know you've been wondering. I know you've been trying to figure it out for all this time, but I'm bringing something new to you. I'm going to show you in the flesh what I am actually like. And Jesus proclaims himself to be that, which is what got him into trouble with so many religious people of his day. And so why is love so important? Why is it so important that he communicates love? It's for this reason. 1 John chapter 4, verse 7 and 8. Dear friends, let us continue to love one another, for love comes from God. Anyone who loves is like a child of God, who knows God, but anyone who does not love God does not know God, for God is love. God himself is love. And so if we cannot and have not received love, we cannot receive Christ. If we don't know what it looks like, we cannot receive Jesus for ourselves. How many salvation stories have we known? And if you think about your own story, for those of you who have had a moment where you can go back and you're like, yeah, that's maybe it was like a kind of moment, like I kind of started following Jesus and then I just realized, yeah, I follow Jesus. I guess I am one of those Christians. And that happens. Others, it's like, no, I remember the time I raised my hand. And both of those are totally acceptable, right? But you have that moment, it's like, I follow Jesus now. Yes, I'm with him, I have a relationship with him. But if we go back in our story, how many stories are so full of looking back and seeing all the times that God was actually pursuing you before that moment, before we even realized it, before we even stepped into that moment, where he was a part of our story and he was loving you through a teacher or a coach who helped you through a difficult time when your parents were going through a divorce. And it was like after the conversation from that teacher or that coach who stepped into your life, you realized, you know what, I'm going to be okay. Even if my parents split up, Even if they tell me they love me, but they don't love each other anymore, it's going to be all right. And that coach or that person set you up in a way that you realize later, that was the Lord stepping into my life, showing me some love. Maybe it was the person who stepped into your life and they said, I know you're going through a difficult time. Let me help you pay your utilities this month. I want to step into your life and I want to do that. Maybe you're a waitress or a waiter and somebody just felt led one time to give you a significant amount of money on the tip. And they're like, I just felt like you needed to know that the Lord sees you today. And you see all of these different things. And at some point, it led to that salvation story. But it was actually love all along because God is love. And so every act of pure, true love is revealing God himself. Without a Bible verse, without a scripture attached, without an invite to Easter service at my church, just showing pure love and what it looks like is revealing God himself to others. And he begins to work and pursue, and he is acting through one act of kindness, through one act of love, through one act of forgiveness, through one act of patience, through one act of gentleness, through all of these things to reveal himself. And so he came into a world that did not understand this. And so Jesus comes and he's like, I have a new message for you. I have a new way of doing things. But there's this group of people. They're called the Pharisees. And in our world today, the Pharisees get a really bad rap. And so many of us who have been like raised in church, or we know a little bit of the Bible, some of you don't know this at all, but there's a group of the people in the Bible who were the religious elite of the day. Like they knew about God. They had it figured out. And so they were called the Pharisees, and they were responsible and in charge of creating and protecting and honoring the law of God. And so you have the 10 Commandments. This is the way that God said to live. And then you have many more added on to that. And so there are 613 laws now that these Pharisees are trying to honor and understand and protect and teach and make sure other people follow this. I don't really blame them. They're good. When you think about this, right? We know now because of Jesus, but in their time, they were trying to honor God. They were trying to make sure that other people knew and understood who he was. And they thought it was one way, punchline, but it's actually something else. And so Jesus came, and he was saying things like this to this religious group over here called the Pharisees and the religious people and those who worked in the temple and all of this. And he would say things like, you guys think it's about making sure the outside of the cup is clean, meaning we look good, we feel good, we got the right representation out there. But he said, I came to clean the inside of the cup. I want the whole thing. I want you to be clean all the way, not just from the outside in, but from the inside out. You think it's about making sure that everyone honors the law, and I'm here to tell you that I know all about the law. And I'm here to fulfill all of it. And because I'm going to fulfill all of it, I will be the one who can actually do the thing that you're asking other people to do. Isn't that crazy? They were looking for people to obey and fulfill the law, and they missed the one who actually did it. It's crazy. Why? Because they were so much in their system. They were so much in their way of thinking. They were so much in their way of this is how it has to be, that they settled for religion and they missed the relationship that they could have had with the one who fulfilled the law. And so some of the Pharisees were entertaining this. I mean, this guy Jesus, we're not really sure who he is. I mean, he's doing some cool stuff. We hear these healing people. He must have some power that comes from somewhere. Is it from the enemy? Is it from the devil? Is it from God? We don't know who this guy is exactly. So they start asking questions. And obviously, ultimately, they ended up crucifying him. You're not. We don't believe that you are who you say you are. And so we know the rest of that story. But in the midst of that, if you can imagine some of the tension and some of the wrestling, there was probably some of them that, well, let me play devil's advocate here, everybody. What if he was from God? No, don't even say that. I mean, can you imagine some of their behind-the-scenes meetings, trying to figure this out because they loved God? And so there was one Pharisee in particular, and he came in the nighttime. And he's like, I'm not willing to put my neck out there for everybody to see, so I'm gonna sneak at night, and I'm gonna see if I can have a conversation with Jesus. And so Nicodemus was his name, and so So he left, he left his people, his religious people over here who had it figured out and all that. And he comes to Jesus and he says, all right, man, you've been saying some crazy stuff. And I'm not sure about it. All of us are kind of unsure about it. And Jesus, I think it's going to end up really bad for you if you keep doing what you're doing. But it could end up really bad for me if I don't check on what you're doing, because maybe I'm the one missing something here. And so he begins to have conversations with Jesus. And he's like, Jesus says to him, I know where you're going. I get it. I seem to be contradicting all of the things that you stand for. But we kind of have to stop right here, because what I need you to know, Nicodemus, and this is Jesus talking to him, he says, if you really want to understand what you can't see, if you really want to understand my words, you're going to have to be born again. And so now he's like, if I wasn't confused already, what are you talking about? And so again, he's focusing on what he can see. And so he asks Jesus, I'm a grown man. How am I supposed to go back into my mother's womb and be born again? He's still totally in the natural world, right? And this is what Jesus was doing over and over and over again. Every conversation, all throughout Scripture, this is what you see, is that Jesus was making things about the relationship and the heart and the inside, all through expressing his love for us. It was a brand new way of doing things. And he says, you are not going to be able to do this unless you leave the old and step into the new. You're going to have to leave everything that you thought to be right and true, and you're going to have to step into something that you may not really be able to fully understand right now, but as you are reborn and you grow and you mature, you can step into that understanding with my help. Are you willing to do that? And so when I said at the very beginning, are we willing, and I hope maybe we're disoriented just a little bit, because there's a lot of focus on behavior out there in our world. There's a lot of things that are just kind of messed up, right? You can watch the news, you can scroll social media, and you can just, that's messed up. Like, how could they? I can't believe they could do that. So-and-so did such and such? No, I don't believe. No, so-and-so did such and such? I don't believe that, right? You know what I'm talking about? Like, it's everywhere. So we got all this behavior stuff. We got all this bad stuff. And yet I think sometimes we're a little hard on people, because listen, if God is love and we are created in his image, then that means that we are also created for love. So he is love. He created us in his image, meaning he created us to be in intimate relationship with him and with each other. So that means that we all need love and we're all looking for it. And yet, when we see other people looking for love, which is the thing that God wants them to look for, and finding it in the wrong places, we get really mad at them and tell them how bad they are. They're actually just looking for love, because it's what we all need. And when our bodies need food, we get hungry. When our bodies need to be rehydrated, we get thirsty. And when we need love, we start looking for what we think will bring us the life we're looking for. And it comes out in a whole bunch of different ways. And so sometimes we'll say things like, well, all these people, they're just rejecting God. They're just in this category over here. All these people, they're just so whatever. And you might put whatever label of people in that category. And so you might call them an agnostic. You might call them an atheist. You might call them they just really love doing bad things, and they're not willing to give their sin up because it's too much fun. And like, okay, maybe some of that's true. And there could be some people certainly that are just not ready to go there, because what happens in order to receive real love from God is you do have to be vulnerable and be the real you. And for some people, that might mean I have to go back to my trauma when the only person I was supposed to trust in my life took advantage of me. And now I don't know what to do with that hurt and those scars, and I'm not sure I'm ready to deal with that yet. Do you see how true love gives empathy for this person now instead of calling them out? Do we see how it can be a difficult task sometimes to really step in and really understand what love is really like? And how some people may have a hard time with that? Because now they have to step into the reality of their life that they don't feel safe. They don't feel safe with anyone else. They don't feel safe with God. So how can I be vulnerable enough to show up as the real me and let God love me for who I really am? How can I step into that moment? Some people just aren't ready. But I think there's one other option. I think it's also possible they just don't want what we have. Because I'm not sure some of us have real love. I'm not sure the church in America has shown the world what real love looks like. I'm not sure that Westchester and Cincinnati has understood how good the love of God is. We think about God being love, and his commission to us was, here's how people are going to know you. I came to do something brand new. This is the way it was before. Here's the truth. Honor the truth. Stand for the truth. Repeat it, repeat it, repeat it. Make sure everybody does it. And what I'm here to do is, if you're willing to be reborn and step into pure love, where I love you right now, just the way you are, you can see something new. And so he tells his followers, what you have seen in me, what you have observed me doing, the way that you have watched me live my life, in other words, the way that you have seen me fulfill the law and introduce a new one. What was his new law? The law of Christ is love God with your heart, all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second one is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. Loving God and loving other people are like this. They go together. In another place, he sums it up and he only says, love as I have loved you. In other words, this love thing is really important. And so he says to his disciples before he leaves, I want you to know how you are going to be known by other people. Here's how they're going to know that you're my followers and not their followers. Jesus wasn't the only rabbi, by the way. There were many, many rabbis. Here's how you're going to know, here's how everyone's going to know that you're mine. Because of the way you love. That's it. You will be known by the way you love because this world has never seen it before. This world has no reference for it. And when they see you, they're going to say, wow, what is that? I hope that we're asking ourselves the question at the moment as we're having this conversation, this dialogue, are we known as the church in America, as the church in Cincinnati, as the church in Ohio, as the church in our families, as the church in our workplaces? Are we known for the way we love? And if not, why not? Is it possible that we haven't fully stepped into the new covenant, the new law, the new way of doing things? Is it possible that we need to be reborn in ourselves to experience a love like we have never experienced before? So that when other people see us, they see him. They see true love. We were driving home last night, my wife and I in the car, and there's a beautiful sunset. And so I don't know how sunsets work, if they look the same everywhere or just where we were. Anybody? Like, it was like a really cool one last night. Anybody else see it? Okay, all right, cool. It was just amazing. And so my wife said, can you imagine like an artist trying to replicate that? Like, look at all the different shades of blue and the way that the sun is reflecting on the bottom of the clouds, and then other ones it's like on the top of the clouds, and like all these different colors. I mean, can you imagine trying to recreate that? And see, the reality is that in our world, while we're all looking for real love, most of what we get is just a cheap imitation. It's got a version of it. Like you could look at a painting and say that's a sunset. No, it's a painting of a sunset. It's not the sunset. Only the sunset is a sunset. And so I know that in this world that we live in, there's a dichotomy, a disparity between real love and what the world knows as love. And so it's hard for us sometimes to step in. You're like, no, but the world doesn't understand the kind of love I'm talking about. And so we could just kind of get irritated because then there's like some groups, and it's like, well, real love tells people the truth. Because if they don't have the truth, then it's not real love. And so you love people to tell the truth, and we fall on that side, and I totally get that. And so I understand, like, there's this, like, love is love, and love is this, and love is that, and we have all these different definitions of love. And so I think sometimes, like, in our frustration to say, I can't fix what people think love is and all the ways that they think love is, I'm just going to do nothing. And I'm just going to start pointing out all the things that aren't love. Meanwhile, we never show people what real love actually is. I find it really interesting that in the American church in particular, when I was growing up, and maybe some of you can identify with this, it was like, stay away from rated R movies, like secular music, depending on how fiery the preacher was, no PG-13 movies either. And so, you had all of these things that you're like, stay away from it, don't do that. You want to avoid the parents of all evil. And so there was a time in my life, like, I wouldn't even drink an IBC root beer because I didn't want anybody to think that it was beer, and I'm like, if I'm in a picture, somebody puts that online, now I'm drinking a beer, and it's like, all this stuff, and this is silliness, really. But we have these ideas, right? And so the thing now in the church is we don't want people to think we love them too much. Now the thing that we're trying to stay away from is not like, don't go to bad movies, somebody might see you. Don't drink that, somebody might think something of you that you're going to get drunk with it instead of just having one. Don't do whatever, and like all these different things. And now it's like the thing we're most worried about is not loving the world too much, because we don't want them to think we approve. We don't want them to think that we're okay with what they're doing. And so now we start dividing ourselves and putting lines between this group of people, and us. And really what we're doing is more than dividing lines. We're putting people in categories where we start to categorize ourselves kind of by assumption. In other words, if we are able to look upon others and criticize them for the way that they live, the way that they behave, the way that they vote, the way that they believe, we automatically put ourselves above them because we know better. The only way that I can believe something about someone that they should change is if I put myself in the position of having the answer. I was never meant to have the answer. He has the answer. I was never meant to be the one to propagate change in someone's life. That's the Holy Spirit's job. So now, am I trying to become like God and be everyone's conviction and be everyone's truth and be everyone's... Or do I actually believe that His love is enough to change everything? Do I actually believe that I can step into someone's life and show them real, pure love? And that just maybe that seed might take root in their life and begin to grow. And as they begin to grow, God begins to speak to them about things that are hurting them. That's why sin is sin. It's not because God needs us to follow His rules. He was not up in heaven with a list of rules and said to Himself, wow, I really need a creation to follow all of these good rules. I'm going to create some people to follow my rules. That's not what it was for. They were for us so that we could live and we could thrive and we could become all that He intended us to be and live in vibrant relationship with Him. And so, as we start building these walls and these categories, if we had time, I could give you a pen and pad, and I would ask you to write down the first 2 or 3 things that come to your mind when I say words like Democrat, Republican, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, LGBTQ+, single, married, Baptist, Presbyterian, Assembly of God, Jehovah's Witness, Muslim, single with kids, unmarried. And what comes to our mind? Did we already start putting some people in categories a little bit? Did we already have some frame of reference that comes to our mind? It's a really cool thing in the Bible that we don't have to just pick out verses and just read those and try to build a theology on them. So it's just like good Bible study advice when you're reading Scripture, like read the whole book. There were no chapters and verses put in when these were written. These were entire letters that were never meant to be separated and divided. So if you see a therefore, read what happens before the therefore. It'll complete. If you're having a difficult time understanding the Bible, I promise this will help so much. Go all the way back to the beginning of that book and read the whole context. Don't stop at a comma just because the verse starts new. If there's a comma, we wouldn't do this with any other book that we're reading, right? It's one storyline for each book. And so if we look at this, John 3:16, for God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son. But then he says in verse 17 what he didn't come to do. And he says this, John 3:17, for God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe stands condemned already. Meaning the world is already really good at condemning one another. We're all in our groups. We're all in our huddles. We're all with our tribes. We're all with our thing. And he says, I came to do away with all of that. So he says already, because they have not believed in the name of God's one and only Son. This is the verdict. This is the only judgment that needs to be made here. Light has come into the world. He says, I'm here. You don't ever have to live up to this again. I'm here to begin changing from the inside out and to come into your life. And so light has come into the world, but people in darkness instead of light, but people who love darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. And so they stay in that. Why? Because they're afraid to come into the light where condemnation is. But what he's saying is the light no longer has condemnation. Have you ever kept something in secret because you knew that the people who you would tell would not view you the same way anymore? Like things are not going to go well if this comes out. But he says, not so with you. It's not supposed to be that way with you. Bring your stuff into the light. Why? Because there's no condemnation there. And when you're in the light, you can continue to follow the light, and you don't do things the same way you used to anymore because you're in the light. When you're in the dark, you continue doing the same things. You trip over the same stuff because you can't see anywhere. But when you step into the light, you're not going to find condemnation there. You're going to find love and forgiveness and acceptance and wholeness. And now you no longer continue tripping over the same stuff because you now have life. You have light. You have the light of life. You have me with you, and I am with you, and I will continue to bring you life through my love. What is condemnation? Here it is. To separate, pick out, prefer, or to pronounce an opinion of right and wrong. And so Jesus says, I did not come to do that. I did not come to separate. I did not come to pick out, to prefer, or to pronounce an opinion of right and wrong. And so when we assume labels of ourselves, we put ourselves in a self-righteous position among other people. And we start to believe that other people need Jesus more than we do. Well, if they would just whatever. Well, if they would just this. I can't believe they. How could they this? You see how quickly we've forgotten how much we need Jesus ourselves? If love is God, here's the bad news about relationship. So we've talked about what love is, but what is relationship? Well, relationship is every interaction with everybody all the time. Like that's hard. That's hard to live up to if I'm going to love everybody. But the good news is that we can't manufacture it. We cannot love people if we have not received love ourselves. And so what Jesus showed us with his life was when he went up to people like the Samaritan woman. Number one, she was a woman. Number two, she was a Samaritan. Men did not speak to women because women were on a lower level. And so if you enjoy women's rights, you can thank Jesus for that. He's the one who started that. He started elevating women. He has started elevating that they have value. He started elevating kids and children. He started elevating people who were the outcasts, who were on the outside, because he talked to people who had the Samaritan label that Jews were not supposed to talk to, because we're going to label them, we're going to condemn them, we're going to put them in a different category and say, go sit over there because I'm over here. And so Jesus would get up from the table with Pharisees and go walk to the people that they were declaring unclean. That's what he does for me. That's what he's done for you. That's what he wants to do for this city. That's what he wants to do for your neighbors. That's what he wants to do for your coworkers. This is what he wants to do for your children. It's not only the woman at the well, it's the woman caught in adultery. And he comes down where everybody else wants to throw stones at her and say, how could you? And he says, those of you who have never sinned. In other words, if you could really become aware of your own need for me, you would put your stones down right now. And they did. It's like the Roman soldier who comes to him and he says, my servant at home, he's sick, but I've heard what you can do. And I believe that if you just speak the word, he will be healed. You mean the Roman soldier who was a part of the political system that was going to kill Jesus? And yet Jesus stepped into his world and said, I will heal him because of your faith. And in fact, I haven't even seen faith like this in my crowd of Pharisees who say they love me, who say they love God, who say they want God. And isn't it amazing that Jesus can say things like, in the last days, which, by the way, we're in the last days, because all the days from when Jesus left to when he comes back, those are all the last days there. We don't know when it's going to come, when it's going to happen, but we're in the last days. And he says, in the last days, there will be people who do many, 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 many things in my name. They're going to show up all the right places. They're going to do all the right things. They're going to heal people. They're going to cast out demons. They're going to proclaim my word. They're going to proclaim my truth. And when it comes down to it, you want to talk about the judgment of God, here's what we're going to be judged for. Not all of our little behaviors that he's already taken care of. We're going to be judged by the way we loved. He said, depart from me, I never knew you. And the word knew you there is like intimacy on a wedding night. We didn't know each other like that. He gives a vision and a revelation to John, and he writes it in Revelation chapter 2. And he says, to this church, you've done many, many great things. You've been wonderful things. You've stood for right things. You've stood for all the right things. You've sacrificed. You've served. You've done all of the stuff that you're supposed to. And he goes to a whole big list, but he says, this I have against you. You've forgotten your first what? Love. You've forgotten what this is really all about. And so if you'd close your eyes with me for a moment, I just want you to see yourself in the story for a minute. I want you to see yourself as the tax collector that was sitting at the table of Jesus, who was the worst of the worst and given his own category. It wasn't just sinners, it was sinners and tax collectors because they were so bad. And on the other end of the table of Jesus was a zealot who cared so much about the law of God that he would have been willing to kill the tax collector, and yet Jesus brought them together. Down on the other end of the table, you might see yourself. There was James, and there was the sons of Zebedee who came from privilege and came from a wealthy family. And then on the other end of the table, there were fishermen who smelled, and they had to fish because they weren't good enough to do anything else. Where do you sit at the table? Jesus' table is full of everybody. Every category, every person, every race, everyone who may not feel like they're good enough. And if you're in this room and you don't feel good enough, you don't feel loved by God, let me tell you today, you are loved by him. Your neighbors, your coworkers, your children. Could we start becoming known today by our love for one another? Could we receive the love of God in such a powerful way that we see ourselves in our need for him in such a way that other people look at us